I hope everyone had a good week this week. I did. Although in the middle of it, I had a bit of a crisis, and I call it a just say no crisis. As in, why didn't I just say no? Maybe you've had one of those before. Something was added to my schedule, and my plate was already very nicely filled. I'd gone to the buffet, filled my plate with all the nourishing things, and somebody reached out with a large spoon and put something kind of on the edge of the plate, so it got unbalanced and started spilling. It was like that. So I called my brother for some sympathy, maybe some advice. We have a good relationship. And he said, just say no. He's a really intense guy. He's really cool. He's like, yeah, just say no, man. Another friend of mine, also a man, he said, no is a complete sentence, Kylie. And I love that. And at the same time, the problem is that sometimes when people are in need, saying no is hard. And when there's things that we want to do, maybe it's not someone in need, but there's just things we want to do, it can be hard even when it's good for us to say no. And think back to the last time that you should have said no, but you didn't. Whatever it is, maybe you bought something you didn't really need. You volunteered to do something you didn't really have the capacity for. You ordered dessert when you were actually already completely full from a really nice meal. And at those moments, we desire something more than, like the desire is louder than our inner wisdom. Like we have both things going on inside of us. Our inner wisdom is there and our desire is there. And at that moment, the desire is just a little louder. And you can really get caught up when this desire, or also it could be fear. It's these two energies the Buddha talks about. It's grasping and aversion, so pushing away or clinging for and pushing away. Desire, fear. These two energies can really get a hold of us. And when they do, you're not free. You lose touch with your wisdom. So this all made me think of the Buddhist concept of renunciation, this wonderful practice of renunciation. And I want to just pause for a moment to mention that in the English language, I want to talk about something a little different than how we normally contemplate this idea. In English, renunciation sort of has an unpleasant ring to it, right? It's kind of like, it sounds a little bit like self-deprivation or self-punishment or some kind of penance, renunciation. It reminds me of, going on a diet to lose weight, right? You give up all these foods you enjoy, and it's very healthy and good for you, good for us. But while we're doing it, we're really obsessing over it. There can be a lot of unpleasantness surrounding it. And at the end, everybody goes off their diet eventually. It never lasts forever. But that's a more traditional, for me, a more traditional idea of renunciation. It's this kind of thing where you're just like, well, I'm going to put this aside because it's the right thing to do. But in your heart of hearts, it's not, I guess on the surface, it's not down deep. And in the Buddhist teachings, renunciation is different. It's a liberation action. It's an action that brings liberation, both immediate microscopically, atomically, and then on a broad scale, complete liberation. So in the Pali language, liberation is known as nekkhamma, Nekkhamma, nekkhamma. It's not a word I'm very familiar with. And it's one of the 10 paramis. We've discussed the 10 paramis. These qualities that the Buddha laid out for us to create conditions that are really, really conducive to your internal freedom. So he said, these things, if you practice these things, they really help. They'll help you get there to that place you want to get to. In these 10 paramis, renunciation is included. It's actually number 3 after generosity. Generosity is the first. Morality is the second. And then renunciation is the third. And I won't go through the other 7, but you can look them up. So this renunciation is a little bit different. Now, when I was first introduced to it, it felt kind of the same as what I was used to hearing. So the first time I was introduced to the idea of renunciation in the Buddhist manner was when I was going to Blue Cliff every year for my January retreat. And there was this woman there that I made friends with over a couple of years. She was going kind of at the same time, so we'd show up at the same time. And she was just lovely. She had a big laugh and a very sharp sense of humor. And the last time that I saw her, the last time I went up and we were there together, she let me know that she was about to join the monastic order. She was about to become a novice nun in this Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. I was so surprised. Anyway, she was explaining that, she had a lot to do. She had to sell her car and close up her lease and sell her everything, or give away her everything, her coffee maker, her clothes, her shoes, all her sneakers. A tremendous movement of the mind to letting go of all worldly possessions. I was literally floored. Here's somebody I had this relationship with, and we talk about things, and she was completely ready to give this all up. And if you've ever met one of these monks or nuns, there's a few exceptions, but by and large, they're some of the most profoundly and deeply happy and peaceful people you'll ever meet. It's like a breath of fresh air to be in a room with them. It really, really is. And so it really makes you pause, this idea of how can you do that and how can you give up so much and be so happy? It just makes you pause. And then it makes you wonder, well, do I have to do that in order to be happy? The good news is you don't, although it definitely helps in degree, on a spectrum, of course. But we can apply this concept of renunciation to our non-monk lives, our regular way. They call it the lay people. We're called the lay people. So our lay life is definitely benefits from this idea of renunciation. So I want to give you a quote, this broad definition of how renunciation can help us. and what it is. And this is a quote from a woman by the name of Barbara O'Brien. She's an author, also a practicing, I think, Zen Buddhist, and she's written extensively about Buddhism and religion and how it impacts culture and whatnot. She's a great writer. Anyway, she, in a nutshell, says, most broadly, renunciation can be understood as letting go of whatever binds us to our ignorance and suffering. The Buddha taught that genuine renunciation requires thoroughly perceiving how we make ourselves unhappy by grasping and greediness. When we do, renunciation naturally follows, and it's a positive and liberating act, not a punishment. So it's perceiving how we make ourselves unhappy. Perceiving how we make ourselves unhappy. And for this, I'd like to move over to cookies, some of my favorite things in the world. And I'll preface it by saying that food is one of the most wonderful parts of life. It's so satisfying and nourishing. And it also has the potential to cause suffering, right? And, from having had too much accidentally, okay, that's a little one. But contemplating cookies, right? When you eat a cookie, maybe let's say it lasts for 1 minute. It's a little cookie and you eat it and you check your clock and that pleasure is there for a minute. And maybe there's a little bit of residual pleasure you have, while it's still lingering, the memory of it is there in your mouth. And, there's always this natural inclination. Maybe you want a little bit more. Maybe you want a lot more, and there's 24 cookies in the package, right? By using math, that equals 24 minutes of happiness. Now you could take that and have it all at once. You could spread it out through your day. But even if you ate the entire box, it's just 24 minutes. We'll be generous and say 48 because we're being generous. But inevitably, there will be the same things ailing that were there before. Because this idea of looking to sensory pleasures for our happiness, you always end up in the same boat. There's 5 senses. There's things that we enjoy to see with our eyes. And it's wonderful, and it's fleeting. I think with mindfulness, when we practice mindful eating, right? When you mindfully eat the cookie, or when you mindfully enjoy the view of trees or whatever it is, whatever that sensory pleasure that you have, if you're mindful with it, you're really there with it, you can really enjoy it, you can really be there, really be alive. And if you bring in your wisdom of anicca, impermanence, you know it's going to end. You know it's going to end. And so you feel, you see the futility in holding on to it. You see the futility in grasping for it, in wanting it to stay. I call it the cheap happiness. It's the cheap happiness. It's the pair of shoes that you bought because they were $12 at the Payless or whatever that store used to be called. It looks so good. They're so shiny. And they fall apart quick, and then your feet hurt again. And even if you buy the nice Italian ones, they're going to last longer, but they too will wear out. And so when you see this process, this renunciation really naturally arises. And the Buddha said of renunciation, and this is from the Dhammapada, verse 290. He writes, he says, if by giving up small pleasures, great happiness is to be found, the wise should give up small pleasures, seeing the prospect of great happiness. So giving up small pleasures by seeing the prospect of great happiness. Now, just to pause here, renunciation is not about never desiring anything again or not doing something nice ever again. It's not about that. It's about how caught up in it all you are. How attached to the desire. The desires come and the desires go. It's whether do we latch on to our desire or do we just let it naturally come over like a wave and do we let it go? And there's a quote, I have a quote from Tricycle magazine that made me laugh. They describe it nicely. They write, "Herein lies the key. Letting go of desire forever is not the goal. We're bound to fail at that. It's unnatural. It's cultivating the intention to loosen our attachment, not just to material things and sensory pleasures, but to self-obsession and destructive emotions as well. Renunciation isn't about taking monastic vows or exchanging your Tempur-Pedic mattress for a pallet. It's about the wisdom to realize that holding on to anything impermanent only brings sorrow. Think of renunciation as the Marie Kondo of inner clutter. A good mental clean-out leads to the joy of freedom. To find true happiness, we have to let go." So this renunciation is a movement of letting go mentally. And the physical process of doing it is a good practice. Because when you let go of something physically, you actually are also letting go mentally. I thought it was interesting in that quote that I just read that they mention 4 things to practice the renunciation of. They mention the material things. And so I just invite you to contemplate things that you can let go of. And I reflect on this. I think about how when we go on vacation, everything is so light. You know, you check into a hotel and you're going to see all these nice sights. And part of it, I believe, is this renunciation we've just undertaken without really knowing it. Nothing there is ours. So we have nothing to worry about. You know? Of course, it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt that people are cooking for us and cleaning our room and whatnot. But there's this other element. Letting go of sensory pleasures. Again, for me, that one is more about, not about renunciation of our enjoyment of life, but renunciation of our attachment and our dependency on things to be pleasant in order to feel content. Because so often things are not pleasant. So often they are, so often they're not. Not being too attached to either one. Self-obsession, they mentioned, practicing the renunciation of self-obsession. I don't think anyone here is probably a particularly self-obsessed person. I don't think of myself that way. And yet, a nice way to practice this is to imagine yourself maybe on the 28th floor of an apartment building in Manhattan at night, and you're looking out over the city, and you see thousands and thousands of little lights in the apartments all around. And each little light represents another being like you, just like you. And inside of that mind are all the worries and all the anxieties, all the fears, just like you. And so allowing that understanding to go through you. And the fourth thing they mentioned to practice the renunciation of is destructive emotions. And this one is difficult. When we have the difficult emotions, they feel so real. But can we just tend to the emotions and let them go? Is that possible? Destructive emotions are somewhat of an addiction, a habit, an addiction. My own teacher has refused to let me put responsibility for the difficult things that I face, all these emotions and thoughts, and they feel so real. And I'll come to her with a problem that's so real, and we'll work through it. And as you probably experience, you can usually trace it back to some habit that you developed from your ancestors, your parents, your grandparents, and you're like, this is why it is. And the instruction is to not put responsibility on your ancestors. They provided a condition, and that's the condition that's made you, that's formed these phenomena that come through you. But once you've once you've exhumed the ghost, when they're out, practicing release, practicing renunciation, letting go of the story. I'll say one more place where renunciation happens that is our greatest place to practice, and that's during meditation. We practice renunciation during our meditation. Right? Because we have these thoughts that are always popping up. And the thoughts they can be so much. They can be interesting thoughts or disturbing thoughts. We're rehashing something that happened, or we're rehearsing for something. We're worrisome thoughts. So helpful. So many thoughts are so helpful. So many are so unhelpful. And so our practice when we meditate, we sit, and when these thoughts and feelings arise, we always say yes. We don't judge. We say, oh, there you are. Come on in. I come into the living room. I'll give you a short interview. I'll sit with you for just a moment. And once you've seen it, then you can practice your renunciation, you let it go, and you come back to the breath like that. So we get these subtle, beautiful opportunities to practice, even as we're sitting in meditation. And it's very powerful. And it frees you. Each time you practice this, it frees you up a little bit more to live in the present moment, a little more to live in your wisdom. And you know how good that feels.